Wow, that's deep, man. And it's right at a time when as I'm working with more and more entrepreneurs, coaching the entrepreneurs, you can very clearly see the problem. And there's that point because I mentor and I coach and I teach, right? So, and they get blurred sometimes simply because you see the problem early on and you can just literally reach in and go, solved. This business podcast, the Two Business Guys Mastermind, uncovers for you secrets and share tips and tricks to entrepreneurship as they mastermind on how to have startup, operational, and overall business success so that you can go on to get better results. Enjoy. So we are in the middle of a hot topic, everybody. And on one hand, it was like sales versus marketing. Why aren't you doing more sales for your company? Now, this is stuff that we've talked about before, but the two business guys got to get together and mastermind. And Rob is adding a component of the leadership part, right? And why aren't you doing what you know to do? I'm looking at it from the sales side. Why
Hmm.
aren't you doing what the numbers tell you to do? So we're going to go ahead and Rob was taking it
Yeah.
from there. Go ahead, Rob. What were you talking about?
Yeah.
How
Well,
what you do?
y- yeah, the biggest thing about it is, since time immemorial, so many people think that it's about innovation. And while innovation is helpful, right? Innovation is a long process. And generally, even when we're innovating, quote unquote, we're not actually creating from whole cloth. We're taking and connecting together things that already exist in maybe a way that they haven't been connected together before.
Mhm.
The innovation is a small part of what's actually there. What's really there is already things that have existed. And similarly in leadership, leaders are not, you know, these just amazing idea savants that are like, here is the solution that you all couldn't see. That's not how it works. Right. If you take any of the leaders, like, business leaders, political leaders, all the rest of that, take any of the greatest leaders that you could think of, put them on a list, and what you will see is that nothing that they did was original. Right. Steve Jobs, one of the greatest innovators of the last century. Do y'all realize that nothing that made, Apple made,
That is interesting to me.
right? Like Apple wasn't the first one to come up with the graphic interface. Xerox was. Apple wasn't the first one to come up with the mouse, right? Apple wasn't the first one to come up with the MP3 player.
That's true.
Apple wasn't the first one to come up with smartphone. They didn't create new things. What they did was solved for the problems of why existing things couldn't do well, why things that should be doing well weren't.
Mm.
That's what leadership is. Leadership is figuring out why it is that people aren't doing what they should be doing and removing those obstacles. And so one of the things me and Randy were talking about earlier is like a lot of leaders get bogged down because they're always trying to solve problems. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's what you have a team for. Your team are
Yeah.
supposed to be the chief problem solvers. Your job is to be the chief obstacle remover so that your team can actually do their job.
Now, we should probably repeat that because let's listen, everyone. What I found myself talking to Rob about now, I got degrees in organizational development and all that kind of stuff, right? In business, and just that one statement, it's like, well, you got to stop solving problems. But I thought that's what we do. You've got to be the chief obstacle remover, right? Chief obstacle remover. What's that? COR. I've never even seen those kind of call letters.
Be the core
But
officer. There
we
we go.
really have to go into that a little bit deeper because I think when we think about our businesses and where they're at, why some are failing, why some are not achieving more, is it because we got these problem solvers in there when they should be obstacle removers? I need
Mhm.
to talk about that
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, well, the big thing about it is so many people get into leadership positions because of their ability to solve problems, their ability to get things done, right? That's what we get known for. That's what our validation comes from. And so what we expect is that's what people are hiring me for.
Mm.
Here's the thing about leading people, right? And I was so first thing first, I was guilty of this too. Like this is where I come from. I was a lawyer. I was really good at being a lawyer. I was a teacher. I was really good at being a teacher. I became a Marine Corps officer and I was good at the stuff that I needed to do. So I became a company commander. And in that role, I went right about the same thing that I used to do. I went and started solving problems. Here's a problem, go work on it. Here's a problem, go work on it. And then I realized that there were more problems than there was time in my day for me to solve. That makes sense since I was running a company of 220 other people at the time, right? But it's one of those things that when you run into it, you're like, but no, if I just work harder. And then you have the existential crisis of, if I can't solve these problems, am I still valuable? And so many leaders that I work with, and I work with C-suite people all the way from, billion-dollar corporations down to small businesses. And one of the interesting things that you see consistent across the board is, this is where our identity is. There's kind of a before you know and an after you know, period. And for everybody that's before they know this thing, they're struggling with the same problem. It doesn't matter whether they're running a billion-dollar company or whether they're running a $50,000 company. And the problem they struggle with is a sense of self that is outside of getting things done yourself and being the primary reason why something got done. Because leadership is actually the exact opposite of that. If you're the primary reason that something gets done, you're not actually leading. You're doing, and everybody else is just sitting around watching.
Uh-oh. Come on with it.
Right?
If I was in church, I'd say, preach.
Right? Like,
preach,
let's think
Pastor.
about a classic example, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, in some of the seasons that he played in the NBA, averaged 37 and 38 points a game. He almost averaged 40 points a game for a season.
A whole game.
Right? And one year, he averaged 37 points a game and was the number one defensive player in the league in the same season. But his team was getting bounced in the playoffs because he was doing the lion's share of the work. He was leading in name only, I say, right? Like he was in front. He was in charge. He was the best, but his team was not performing because the performance was more than he could muster to make it happen. And one of the things, the classic thing that Phil Jackson had Michael Jordan do was to carry less of the load. He actually had to score less points. He had to get more assists. He had to get more rebounds. He had to play more off-ball defense. He had to do a whole bunch of other stuff that made the other people on his team better. So much so that if Scottie Pippen had played on any other team in the NBA with the numbers that he had, he'd have been a number one star on any other team in the NBA. Right?
Interesting.
And once that started happening, once Horace Grant, John Paxson, Bill Cartwright, and all the role players started playing more, doing more, interestingly enough, the Bulls began to win and become near unstoppable. But what was necessary for that was for Michael Jordan to not be the primary reason why the team was going to win. And once that happened, once teams couldn't just focus on Michael Jordan, once they had to worry about the rest of the team, Mike was still going to get his, but now they became unstoppable.
That's interesting. And wow, that's deep, man. And it's right at a time when, as I'm working with more and more entrepreneurs, coaching the entrepreneurs, you can very clearly see the problem. And there's that point, because I mentor and I coach and I teach, right? So, and they get blurred sometimes simply because you see the problem early on and you can just literally reach in and go, solved. But to your point, if you do that, they sit around and watch and never develop the muscle. Right. And so it's just like dawning on me as we're doing this mastermind, and why I just love doing these masterminds, right, is because you have a chance to just kind of come together and have another perspective bounce off of what you're thinking, and makes your perspective better. So on some levels, and I literally did this recently, I says, I see your whole business. I can solve it for you. But if I do it, you never develop the muscle. I said, so I got to step back. So that was that moment where you kind of go, let me remove the obstacle. And this is what I said. I says, everything that you would need to do, there's a tool for that or someone for that. That was refreshing. Yep. Because it says, well, how would I do this? Well, here's a tool that I know that I use personally that you could use to do that. Oh, okay. Right. So remove the obstacle in the thinking, I can't do it because of X. Okay.
Exactly. And the beauty of what you did there, and this is so like, I want y'all to catch this, because what he did is you prompted the questions that you have answers to. But here's the thing. They're asking the questions, right, which means that they're discovering the problem and looking for solutions. There's a big difference between you seeing the problem and offering a solution before they fully understand the problem, versus when they're coming and you're helping them to understand the problem. You're helping them to see the problem. So they're asking the right question. Well, how do I overcome this issue? Because I see that I need to get from here to here to here to here. How do I overcome this? Well, there's a way for you to overcome that, right?
Yeah.
Which one of these? And then and my favorite thing is to always to give them another question, another problem to solve, which is, which of these options works best for you?
Yeah.
Because now they're making the decision, and then now they're owning the plan, right? And that ownership, there's so much. It's so important that ownership transfer from the leader, quote unquote, to the led, because once they have that ownership, now they're scanning the horizon for problems like you are, instead of just waiting for you to point out the next problem.
That is so interesting. I was working with a young entrepreneur, young. This guy is maybe 20 some years old, right? And so he had in front of him two opportunities that he felt that an area he wanted to go in, right? Because we've been talking, and it's like, and so he says, well, which one do you think I should do? Now, I clearly know which one he should do, in my estimation, right? Because, he's got no money, he's getting ready to do this thing over here. It's going to cost a whole bunch of money and all this kind of stuff. Right? So I says, but if you start it like this. So, but I said to him, I says, well, which one do you believe will be, which one do you believe will be easier to, MVP start? And he literally picked the one that he had in his mind.
There you go.
And I says, okay. Instead of arguing, because he clearly had his mind made up that he wanted to do this thing, I says, well, it just seems to me that that's a hard way to make some money. But it's what he wanted to do, blah, blah, blah. It just seems to me that that's a hard way to make some money, right? Because, you got capital expenses that you'd have to go acquire, blah, blah, blah. I says, and then if we say, well, how much do I believe I can make given the environment that I'm going to go in? These kind of things, right? Long before we did numbers and all that. But this seems like a hard way. He said, well, then he came back after probably a week, didn't talk to me for a week, kind of thing. And he says, well, so what you're saying is, then he says, basically what I was telling him, I says, well, what I'm saying is that one seems to be a hard way to make some money. Whereas this one, you don't need inventory. You just need drive and some tools and some time and some tenacity.
Right.
That's what you need over here. Now, maybe that gets into the question of whether you got that. I don't know.
Exactly. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I love that you made that point, because right, when you did it the way what you just talked about, where you're like, it doesn't seem like you can make a lot of money, right? That's my appraisal of the situation. I'm giving it to you so that now you can go digest it, you can go argue with it, you can go do, right? But it's almost like it's external, and I'm invading your inner space. One of the things in this, in what we're talking about here, another way that to do that same thing is to say, okay, so we got these two situations here. Which one of these do you think is the easiest one to make money with? And what are the reasons why you think this is the easiest one to make money with? And then if he does the same thing, well, I think this one where it's okay. So you believe that doing this is the easiest. So what do you have to do on this side that you believe is harder than those things? And now he gets to the point where it's like, oh, wait, I didn't actually think about this, right? What you're doing with asking those questions and walking him through it, biggest thing about it is you're forcing him to face what you already see, but that he can't see. And the
Hmm.
reason he can't see it is because it's like when people, you ever been with somebody and you're like, hey, look at this. And they looking over here. And you're like, no, you got to look at this. And they still looking over here, right? Until you get them to actually look over here, they not, you can't move forward in the conversation,
Correct. Correct.
right?
Correct.
And the questions are the thing that gets them to shift their focus. Because the question, if you're just telling them to stop looking at this, now they, no, I want to look at this. This is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm doing. Quit bugging me. Instead, you say, in the analogy, what you're doing is you're asking them, so how would that be better?
What
Or
else do
how
you
does
see?
this thing, or how does this thing impact that thing?
Yeah.
Now, because you're still staying on the topic of this, but wait, impact this. Wait, some can impact this. Let me look at it. Let me make sure. Because you're aligned with their fear, which is that they're not going to be able to do this thing that they want to do. And the reality is, and you know this when we coach entrepreneurs, in the first couple of minutes whether the idea is going to work. That's because we've got years and years and years
Yeah.
of
That's
business
insight.
experience,
Yeah.
right? And we've literally coached hundreds of entrepreneurs through business ideas, besides all the tens, if not hundreds, of business ideas that we've tried and that have failed or that have succeeded, right? Like we've got way more reps, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're playing ball. Like the longer you've been playing ball, you can tell when the shot gonna be off or when the shot gonna be in,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's your shot or somebody else's
You need
shot.
to come in closer.
Exactly,
Don't
right?
shoot from
And
there.
then
That's not your skill set.
exactly, right? And people are like, "How come you can get rebounds?" Blah, blah, blah. It's like I know where the ball's gonna come off of the rim because I've seen enough missed shots that I can tell by the trajectory, right? Like, and it's the same thing. We can see it quickly. Teaching them how to see it is a
Yeah.
whole different ball game, and it requires them to first look at it and them to be able to then look at what's the difference between this one and to do the compare and contrast, right?
Man, and it gets tiring, y'all. Sometimes,
Yeah,
trust. I had to
it
let a client go simply because
exactly,
they just wouldn't, see they just wouldn't see it. And
exactly, and
and
that's
then
the
they
reason
finally
why.
says, "Well, what's the block?" I was like,
That's the key. That's why
"Maybe I'm the
question
block. I'm
based,
out." Right.
nah, question based coaching, right? And there's a couple of books
That's
that
good.
I really
Question
love
based
in this
coaching.
question based coaching, right? There's a book called The Coaching Habit, which really goes into this and is really good with it. There's a number of different books, but Coaching Habit, I think it's Michael.
I think
I
I
can't
have that
remember his
book.
last name. I think you do. 'Cause I think I heard about it actually from you. Um, but it gives you a kind of framework. But the
Yeah.
reason why I
So
talk
it
about
tells you a
question based,
lot about stop that. You're leading the witness. Stop. Just stop that.
exactly, right?
Just do this. And what else?
Exactly.
Is that the one that's
And
and what else?
and what
Yeah.
else?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because question based coaching is all about, again, you're helping them to discover. And when you ask open ended questions, especially when you ask curious open ended questions, it doesn't trigger people's threat meters, right?
Yes.
You're not a threat when you're curious about them. Here's the interesting thing, right? People's the top three things that people want is to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel valued. When you're curious about somebody, it makes them feel seen, it makes them feel heard, it makes them feel valued. Even if the reason you're curious about them is because what they just said was the stupidest idea you ever heard in your life. The fact that you're
I'm
curious
curious.
about how they could come up with that and how they could think that that makes sense will endear you to them and allow you to ask them questions and for them to answer you questions. And eventually, right? And again, it may feel like it is more tiring, especially if you're not good at asking questions. So this is something you got to practice, right? Again, I come to this from a legal background. I was a litigator. Guess what? Asking questions was my job. If I'm interviewing, I'm asking questions. If I'm writing a motion or defending a motion, I'm asking questions. If I'm interviewing witnesses or if I'm uh uh if I'm taking witness testimony on the stand, I'm asking questions. And so it is something that I had years and years and years and years and years of practice on. So I'm not going to act as if you've never been doing this, you're just going to pick it up
Yeah.
like that. No.
Yeah.
But one of the
Reps.
things that I coach leaders to do is to do this. And we have programs that we teach leaders how to do it, where you can get reps in, where you can actually have practicums, where you're just practice coaching with other people who are learning coaching. And um it's a really forgiving environment, an environment where you're not expected to be an expert, where you're actually working on your craft instead of being thrown in the gladiator coliseum
Hmm.
where you either win or you die. Right now, put it, in a nice little bumper car space, right? Like the worst that can happen is you ask a bad question and you'd be like, oh, that was a bad question. Right? But in that space, once you train that muscle, once you learn that skill, the beautiful thing about it is it actually makes coaching so much easier because you don't have to tell anybody anything.
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely will you wind up telling people things. And so now, when you do tell people stuff, when you do give a recommendation, when you do give here's what I think in that situation, it's prized possession because you rarely, if ever do. As a matter of fact, one of the first rules that I give my clients is if you ask me what should I do in this situation, you're going to be mad at the answer that I give you. Because the answer that I'm generally going to give you is, that's a really good question. What do you think is the best thing for you to do in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Because my job is not
Yeah,
to tell you what I would do because you ain't me.
man.
There's a
That I
whole
tell you,
bunch of
that's
idiosyncrasies that we have that's way different.
that's
You're not gonna
so
do it like
eye
I do
opening. It really is. It's eye opening from the perspective of you kind of see some of the things that you've been doing wrong, and then you might see why it's not being implemented or carried out because it wasn't their idea. It
it.
was a what I would do is right kind of a thing, and then they go, "Well, I ain't you. I'm not you." So, kind
Right.
of a thing, right? So now you're going, hmm. And then I remember watching a couple of really good podcasters that's got millions of followers, and they were always asking questions. Or in Lewis Howes, for example, he would say, "So I'm curious," and I was like,
Yep.
I keep hearing this guy say, "I'm curious," and the people across from him feel they seem very comfortable because he
Mm-hmm.
started off with saying, "I'm curious." So I
Yep.
find myself saying that now. All right, is so I'm curious. Do you think that would and then they kind of
Mhm.
tell you. And then I
Exactly.
go, well, now still, this is what I've been putting on in certain cases, like a coat, but I don't wear it all the time. So I
Mhm.
know that there's a period of time where I'm going, man, I'm doing some stuff wrong. But
Yeah.
when I get back to the curiosity based questions and then letting the person kind of get to their own conclusions,
Mhm.
you kind of see brilliant, right? Like Kung Fu. Remember back in the day, Kung Fu, maybe,
That's exactly it.
depending on how
It's
old you are.
Aikido. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know what you're
and
talking about.
and then the guy
Grasshopper.
he would ask questions. He's like, grasshopper, and he would just ask questions. What do you think? And he was like, well, I think this, and he's like, well, what do
Hmm.
you think about this? And you start thinking about this. Yeah,
Yep.
that
Yeah.
curiosity.
Yeah. Because remember, coaching, mentoring, training, teaching, all of those disciplines, what a lot of people think, what a lot of people focus on is the behavior. But the whole thing that we have to understand about behavior is that behavior is a consequence of the stories that we tell ourselves, i.e., of the thoughts that we have about particular circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
How I react in a situation is completely dependent upon the thought that I tell myself. Perfect example. Everybody's probably had this before. You ever heard a car backfire?
Yes.
Right? Now, depending on where you are, that car backfiring will make you go, that was interesting, or it'll make you hit the deck. I know that I've heard cars backfire when I was in neighborhoods where I normally hear gunshots, and I react to the car backfiring a lot different than I react when I'm in neighborhoods where there hasn't been a gunshot in 50 years.
Now that's interesting.
Right? Because the story that I'm telling myself is same, it's the same input. It's a car backfiring. But the story that I'm telling myself about that car backfiring changes behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're coaching people, what we're trying to do is help them to tell themselves different stories, to think differently about the same inputs. And here's the beauty of it. If we can influence their thinking, their behavior naturally will be changed. It will naturally follow. But so many people start too far downstream and they try to change behavior and it doesn't stick. And it's just like, the analogy of organ transplants, right? The body rejects organs that are incompatible with what the body currently is, not
Mm-hmm.
with what the body is trying to be.
Mm-hmm.
And our job is to make the organ, the behavior, excuse me, as compatible as possible with the body. And so the way that you make the behavior as compatible as possible. And again, this ain't nothing new. I'm not making nothing up. Dale Carnegie wrote about this in 1937 in How to Win Friends and Influence People. And what he said in that book was, if you give people your ideas, they will fight against them like an external alien invader.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can get people to think that your ideas are their ideas, they will protect them like a newborn baby, and they will bring them to fruition because it is their idea. They own it. And so the whole key to coaching is, instead of taking the behavioral ideas that you're talking about, here, you need to do this, which is a behavior change, you go upstream and you get them to think the thought that has the natural consequence of, I need to do this.
See, it's stuff like that. I'm writing notes, y'all, too. So as you watch and listen to this, and we when we come and do these masterminds, selfishly, I'm just learning, and every now and then I'll impart. You notice when I'm on, I'm like, I'm just listening, right? I'm listening to wisdom, but it's all about, I think, as you listen to us, and what we hope that you do is that you take this information and you're able to listen to it without us saying, what you need to do in your business is this and that and this, that you listen to us discuss it and you go, oh, I can pull this piece of information and plug it in and use it in my business. That's the hope. That's why we get together in the Two Business Guys Mastermind with that in mind. Mm-hmm. Listen in, check it out. Yep. If you know some other people that you would like to tell them something, but you can't because they reject your idea, then send them us talking about that very thing. All right. That's what we hope, everyone. This has been the show. We enjoy doing it for you. All right. And we love that, you hit subscribe. We have an ask for you. Hit subscribe. We ask that you share. We ask that you send that information to whomever you believe could be of service from it. Right. And support the other things. Look in the description field. We have things down there for you to support. So that's it, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.